can still tell a pretty good story. It may not be beautiful and eloquent like I can do when I'm on my game, but I can still tell a story that people are going to be like, huh, okay. Mm-hmm. And teaching yoga, I think, is kind of telling a story, right? It's the same thing. I can still move bodies in a safe way, in an honest and authentic way that people energetically are going to feel better when they leave the room. Maybe it won't be my best class, but it's yoga. It's, I got that.
Yeah.
So I think we all have those things. That's sort of like, I think of somebody like plucking a string and it that pure sound comes out. Mm-hmm. There's that string inside each of us, and you're going to find the thing that when you pluck it, that beautiful sound resonates. That's not going to happen with all things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's part of the, it's another example of how the baby speaking every possible phonetic sound it eventually hones in on the language that's around it. And so you go from being this young child or young adult that's full of infinite potential, but then the path forward is to pick the direction you're going to go off in.
We've all been in the thing that we forced ourselves into.
Yeah.
And you might be getting by, but something's broken.
Something's wilting away inside of your soul.
There's a lot of jobs right now in our world, and I wonder about this, that don't pluck that string. Oh, yeah.
Well, this is a problem right now with, so for example, in the countries where egalitarianism between the genders they've gone furthest with making that the purpose of the law, the gender disparity between different careers is actually larger than in countries that haven't gone as far, because when you do your best to level out the socioeconomic playing field, it turns out the biological differences in temperament manifest to a greater degree, actually. So, for example, women dominating physicians and doctors and, childcare, things like that, and then men dominating like engineering, and so it's like you could literally take a man and a woman and just random, and if you had to guess which one was more interested in things versus people, and you picked a man, you'd be right more than 60% of the time. If you picked a woman, and if you had to guess which one was more interested in people as opposed to things, and you picked the woman, you'd be right over 60% of the time in that regard too. And so there's this idea that's going on where there is zero biological differences between men and women, which isn't right. And so one problem that's going on with modern feminism is that they look at like the tech industry, for example, and they see gender disparity. All right, there's way more men in tech than women. What they want to do is fix the problem by making enough women go into tech so it's 50-50, and they want that across the board. But is that reflective of the individual freedom of choice of the people in question to go into a career they find meaningful, or trying to make sure we fill some quota, which is what's going on in Norway right now, where they have to make sure that 40% of the members of any given board of directors for a giant company is at least 40% female.
Yeah.
And if that's not met each year, they'll pull your license to be a company and force you to dissolve the whole entity.
Wow.
Right? And so, but you got to think about what it's like to be on a board of directors. You're working 80 hours a week. You're just slaving away constantly. It's because it's not like it's men trying to force women out of that job. They're also trying to force other men out of that job too. It's insanely competitive. An insanely small amount of men want to do something like that, and they're incredibly efficient beyond belief, incredibly conscientious, incredibly healthy. It's not so the narrative that I'm always trying to poke holes in is the narrative of white male dominating oppression of minorities, and that's just what human history has been, which isn't, there's truth to it, but it's an ideological standpoint because it leaves out nuance and the complexity of the actual situation. And so now it's a really hard problem where there's a lot of women in Norway who are on multiple boards of directors, a lot of women who aren't even qualified to be in those positions because they're just trying to scoop them up because they're going to lose their license to be a business if they don't have 40% females on their board of directors. So it's like, it's not obvious that women would actually, the evidence proves the contrary, that women, typically speaking, wouldn't want that job. And most men don't want that job either.
Yeah.
And so
it's interesting. Yeah. That's so interesting. And I don't know any of the science or statistics behind it. I get interested in like that. What we do in our world right now is we treat symptom. Mm-hmm. So this is the problem. How do we treat the symptom? We're not great at being like, why are we here? Where do we begin? Right? So we get a whole bunch of people in prison. How are we going to rehab them? What are we going to do? We don't think, well, what if we get to all these people when they're like 4, 5, 10 years old? We look at, because that's a hard thing to do. So it's the same thing with that. It's a great idea. I love the concept. They're treating a symptom. There's not enough equality here. Let's treat the symptom. Mm-hmm. But what is the cause? And that's what you're talking about. Like, and
is it even an issue, really?
If everything was equal, what would the actual percentages be here? Would there be 3 women and 7 men? Would there be 1 and 9? Would there be 5 and 5?
Yeah.
Would this boardroom be different than this boardroom? And this boardroom in a tech industry be this way, and a boardroom in a physician's organization be this way? So, like, where do we actually begin to find the truth of how to remedy?
I think the best we could ever hope for is that everyone has the same amount of opportunity to pursue their inner calling.
It's the beginning.
Yeah, and then trying to reorganize people by imposing an idea from the top down is against human nature. It's against their own free will. Because, like, for example, in Scandinavia, where men and women are arguably the most equal in terms of the laws, as far as the law is concerned, the gender disparity is greater in those fields.
Yeah.
So that seems to be the result of their own conscious, independent free will to pursue their own dreams. So is that a problem?
It's all just a big experiment.
Yeah, at the end of the day.
Like, even when we're trying to fix things or change things, like, as long as we're not doing the same things over and over again, which we are also. We are actually doing, but some of this stuff is just a beautiful experiment with the best of intentions. Mm-hmm. It's just, we're finding out things aren't what we thought they were.
Yeah, for sure. How arrogant of us to ever think.
I know.
Well, it's hard. I mean, we can't exist without some sort of conceptual framework, but that framework can become too rigid and like an inner tyrant at work.
Yeah.
And, so again, it's like that yin and yang line down the middle, the order and chaos.
I was listening to one of your podcasts and it kind of made me think of this. At what point are we putting labels on things so much so that we're making up rules to accommodate them? Because we're all just human. Mm-hmm. And then we've got to put all these labels above and beyond it. You're this, I'm this. You're also this, I'm also this. We divide ourselves up in all these wonderful categories, and then now we're trying to re-equalize ourselves based on the 100 categories we put. Mm-hmm. The categories in North America are different than the European ones, and depending on what, we're all trying to fix all these things that in the first place, it's all because we divided each other up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If we all came back together in one big group and divided each other up differently, we'd have to think of a whole bunch of different solutions. Like, what if we just came all back together and started dividing each other up by fingerprints? So these fingerprinted people got these things, and these fingerprinted people got these things. How would we fix all that? Instead of men and women, or instead of old and young, or instead of this color skin and this color skin, like, what if we just threw all those rules out? So at the end of the day, they're all just if you think about it, they're all just a whole bunch of absurd rules. Mm. And yet, because of the rules that exist, people have different opportunities and different this and different that, and which ones are natural and which ones are unfair. Mm-hmm. How do we figure all that out?
It's crazy. I mean, well, we've been talking about that off and on this whole time.
Yeah.
It's so complicated. I mean, it's so complicated.
It is. Like, there's this funny and inappropriate skit, like Dave Chappelle, who is a comedic genius. That skit he does about being racist.
Is it that
blind black man?
Yeah, the blind KKK.
I thought of that so many times, even before I saw that skit. I'm like, racism is so interesting because it's based on what we see, which is so, like, what if you were blind? How would you possibly then hold on to that entire system of belief? You know, and we have a whole bunch of beliefs that are like that. They're completely dependent on things that we can name and conceptualize that are actually not really things.
Yeah, I was hearing some interesting information kind of about the psychology of racism. It seemed like there was a correlate, because there's one of the circuits that you come pre-hardwired with as a baby is a disgust circuit. You're able to see like gooey, bloody, snotty, pussy shit and get disgusted by it. And that's a natural thing. It's a real feeling. And so there's a part of your brain that's hardwired for disgust. And it seems like there was a correlate between places where there was a high frequency of infectious disease, like some reason the population was prone, or the geographical location was prone to infectious disease, and also a higher spike in racist attitudes. So there was this it was like they're starting to try and hypothesize based on this statistic that maybe part of the reason people were racist was because that's a different population of people, that's a different group, maybe they have some kind of disease that could wipe us out if we get near them or something. And that could, I was like, holy crap.
It'd be interesting to see where that leads.
Yeah.
And if that's even, a possible correlation, or if there's some sort of coincidence at work.
Yeah.
Something like sometimes those first sight things, underneath them is another correlation that's completely different than the one you thought.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But it is a whole nother fascinating facet of our society and our lives, right? These labels.
And it's like there's utility to them to a degree, because if you can simplify me, because I'm a human being, as complicated as things get in terms of things that exist, it seems to be a human being. I haven't seen anything more complicated than a human being. And so if you can, for sheer social function, for us to be able to go and inhabit and work in the world, we need to be able to simplify each other to a degree in order so that we can just, work and cooperate and compete productively together in society. But the danger again lies in that becoming too overbearing. And it's like, for example, the feeling of like the raft breaking up from underneath you if, say, a significant other has been unfaithful, and you find out, it's like, well, that person is suddenly not who I thought they were. Everything that I thought about our past together and who that person is, it's like, that's gone. And then not only that, your conceptions of yourself are gone, because it's like, how did I not see this coming? And so it's crazy, because in order to be able to do that kind of thing effectively, you're assuming that I'm good for my word, so you can take me for my word and what I say, which is way more simple than what I actually am. And same with you, and same with you. Yeah. So I see a necessity for, part of being a good person is that you're predictable to a degree. Like, I'm not just going to jump up and start breaking all your stuff and so why
did I invite you?
Exactly. So it's like, there's being predictable is kind of part of being a good person, because people can, like, you say something and I know you're going to do it. Yeah. And, you show up to work every day and you always are there with your family and all these sorts of things. But then there's also, that needs to be kind of counterbalanced by, being spontaneous and alive and being a living human spirit. And so flawed. If you get too hooked on, I think this is what Ram Dass's issue was when you listen to him talk, is it sounded like he was way too caught up in being a psychologist and being a professor and being
Richard Alpert.
Yeah, Richard Alpert. he sounded, when I read his story, it sounds like he was really taken in by all that stuff, and then psychedelics destroyed all of that. And so there's that danger. Even the Catholic Church warns against the proclivity of the rational mind to fall in love with its own productions.
Oh yeah.
So there's that real threat Always. But at the same time, I can't help but see how I don't know if we can completely dispense with our ability to categorize and organize